Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Today we've got two Pennsylvania Dogman stories, and let's start off with the one called The Dogman Family. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was younger, my life had some things in common with one of your Saturday night scary serials. I saw Dogman near our property on more than one occasion. Well, twice to be specific. Both times from my bedroom window. I even called him Dogman when I spoke about him. I could tell that nobody in my family believed me, but I would tell them what I saw anyway. They would feign acting impressed, and it was annoying, but it was better than not telling anyone about it. I don't remember if I told any of my friends, but I know my parents and my sister would roll their eyes whenever I'd bring up the Dogman. I might have been the first in history to call him that, as this was years before the Linda Godfrey book came out. Was the name in use before that? This was in Pennsylvania, not Michigan or Wisconsin, by the way. So let me describe what I saw. This was not the kind of Dogman with the pointed ears and the glowing eyes. This looked like the Shaggy DA or whatever, like a sheepdog with floppy ears that stood perfectly tall, like a man. I even think the feet were sort of like a man's, or really I guess long dog feet at the end of shaggy, human-like legs. What I'm trying to say is that it stood flat-footed, not on its toes like a lot of the drawings you see of Dogman these days. Another thing about it is that it walked around like a normal dog and also like a human. Let me tell you about the first time I saw it, or one of them, I should say. I was watching TV late one night, and I got up to sneak out to the bathroom. I wasn't supposed to still be awake, so I was watching the TV with the sound off. I snuck out to the bathroom, and when I got back, something caught my eye out of the window. It was a white, shaggy dog with gray patches on it, walking through the yard. It just looked like a dog. I think it had its tongue hanging out and the whole thing. But it got to this bush at the edge of the property and suddenly stood up on its hind legs. That really surprised me, and I wondered how it did that as much as I wondered why it did that. I guess I've never understood the how, but I found out the answer to the why question as a skunk emerged backward from the bush. I don't really know if it sprayed the dog or if it just threatened to, but that dog let out a sad howl like it had lost its best friend, then turned and ran straight back all the way across our backyard in the direction it came, but it never dropped back down to all fours. I tell you, it was an astounding sight, but still I had no idea that this was anything but a very, very large sheepdog. I even assumed it must belong to one of the neighbors. So it was an interesting event I got to witness, but I filed it away and didn't even mention it to my family. I hadn't really begun to think of it as a Dogman yet. It was just a big old sheepdog that ran away on its hind legs after being scared of a skunk. I also kind of assumed the dog would come up in conversation with my family or the neighbors sooner or later, since a dog that can walk on its hind legs seemed interesting enough to eventually become the subject of the neighborhood scuttlebutt. Fast forward to probably almost 2 years later, when I again saw the Dogman outside of my window. In fact, this was the event that caused me to name him Dogman and to cease thinking of it as someone's pet sheepdog. This was the time when I saw it stalk and chase a deer. In fact, at first, The deer was all I noticed. I don't even know why it was in our yard in the middle of the night, but there it was. An adult male with big antlers. I find those animals beautiful, and because of that, I was very against all types of hunting throughout my childhood. I didn't want to see Bambi's mom get killed and all that stuff. I was very sincere about it, and I could see no good in hunting, or even in hunters. You might say I was a bit prejudiced. So, I was watching the deer and oohing and eyeing, and then some movement in the trees behind the deer caught my attention. Something was in those trees. I wondered if it might be more deer and grew excited. But when those trees parted and the other creature emerged, it was no deer. Out of those trees walked, and as you can guess, I mean walked on its hind legs, a dogman, very much like that first sheepdog. Possibly it was the same one. This time, the creature was walking as though sneaking up behind the deer. It was like Elmer Fudd sneaking up on Bugs Bunny, but in sheepdog form. Then the shaggy thing leaped on that deer, and I cried out in horror. It used its front paws like hands and held onto the antlers while it tried to bite the deer, missing the times I saw. The deer bolted, and the dogman practically rode it out of my sight, almost falling off, then regaining its hold a few times. That was no sheepdog. A sheepdog couldn't hold onto antlers with its paws, no matter how well it had been trained to walk on its hind legs. I had discovered a new species. But, as I mentioned earlier, it didn't matter, since nobody believed a word I said about the creature. Whenever anything went missing around the house after that, I got kidded that the dogman must have taken it, right? So, now fast forward a few more years. I was, I think, in high school by this point. I had taken to wandering in the woods behind the house, something I had never done when I was a kid. I guess I was at the age where I was both becoming more social and wanting more privacy both at the same time. So I was wandering through the woods when I saw, off in the distance, a little, tiny, young sheepdog. I decided it was my civic duty to trail it to its home, since there were hunters in those woods, and I wanted to know where those dogmen lived. I thought somehow I would be able to protect them from hunters if I knew where they stayed, although I'm certain I had no specific plan as to how I was going to accomplish that. So I kept as much distance from the puppy as I could, and I moved as quietly as I could, and I saw the puppy dogman scamper into a large cave entrance that I had no awareness of prior to that moment. I stayed in the bushes, watching and waiting to see if an adult would come out. I wondered how many of them were living at this location. Then I heard the scariest, craziest kind of growling that I ever heard, and it was coming from both above and behind me. I turned around and saw nothing but fur. I looked up and got greeted with dog saliva dripping onto my face from far above. It was an adult dogman standing on its hind legs, towering over me. It smelled worse than wet dog, and I nearly fainted from the shock. I backed away out of the bushes and into the clearing in front of the cave. I thought this was the end, and I'm afraid I did not greet it bravely. Instead, I squealed and screeched and hyperventilated and held my arms and legs up in front of me, hoping to forestall the inevitable. The creature was baring its impressive fangs at me, curling its lips back, and for the first time, I could see its black eyes poking through the hair covering its sheepdog face. I shouted for help as loud as I could, but I didn't really expect any, fairly deep in the woods as I was. Then a deafening explosion went off nearby, and I was momentarily unable to hear anything over the ringing in my ears. When I opened my eyes, the Dogman was gone, apparently scared off by whatever had made that blast happen. Within seconds, a hunter ran over to me, asking me if I was all right. He was the one who had made the noise. He had fired a round off into the air, saving me from a particularly uncomfortable demise. After I calmed down, the hunter told me never to come back to this location, as this was the home of a dangerous and very rare predator. He also informed me that he took it upon himself to look out for these creatures, and that I must never tell anyone where they lived, as they would most certainly be hunted down as trophies. The hunter told me these beautiful monsters had just as much right to live their lives in peace as we did, and that we needed to respect that. I was kind of surprised to hear all that coming from the kind of person I had always thought of as soulless killers, and I learned a lot about the world that day. I learned that I didn't know very much about the world after all. I learned that I should give other people the benefit of the doubt before judging them. But most of all, I learned to keep my butt as far as possible from the home of the Dogman family. We'll be right back with another Dogman story right after this.
Hey, Biggity Foot. What are you doing for July 4th, yo?
I don't know, Debbie, but I do know what I'm doing the weekend after.
OMG! What's that, yo?
I'm gonna go to the Collectibles Extravaganza up in Boxborough, Massachusetts, right next to Wolf Swamp, where Henry Lee Dogman lives.
Badass, yo!
I know, right?
Are you gonna, sell your stuff?
I'm gonna buy other people's old stuff and turn it into my new stuff.
Good, cause your nest could sure use some, redecorating, yo.
Come to the Collectibles Extravaganza, hosted by the king of pop culture himself, TV's famous Gary Summers, who appeared as an expert on pop culture on the PBS Antiques Roadshow. It's the weekend of July 6th and 7th, 2019, at the air-conditioned Regency Hotel, where Route 111 meets Route 495 in Boxborough, Massachusetts, home of the Wolf People. See you there. Dogman forced me to move. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my wife and I ran into a lump sum of money when a relative we barely knew died. It was quite a surprise and changed our tax bracket, among other things. We were able to afford to move to the country in Pennsylvania, but close enough to the city that I could become a commuter and keep my job. My wife was able to afford to cut back to part-time work she could do from home, and she soon began expecting our first child. We had a dog named Scrapper that moved with us to the country. By that point, Scrapper was getting older, and he mostly liked to sit or lay around all day. He perked up a lot at first when we moved because now he could sit around or lay around on the grass outside, as a dog naturally prefers. All three of us were very happy, and it felt like only weeks passed until we had our son, who I will call Jasper, which is not his real name. We could not have been more content, but as you know, nothing that good can last for long. Scrapper suddenly no longer wanted to be outside. I mean, not at all. My wife thought he needed to see the vet, but I decided to take him out back and sit with him for a while to try to figure out what was going on with him. He instantly began whining and asking to be let back in, but I carried him myself further out into the yard, and we sat down on the grass. I put him down next to me. He remained there, but was just as agitated, yet too afraid to run the distance back to the door by himself, so he stayed by my side. He kept whimpering and staring at the door, and occasionally barking at me, asking me to please go back inside with him. After some time, we both heard something out in the woods at the edge of the property, and poor Scrapper, completely freaked out, panicked and unsure what to do. I looked toward the woods, and I swear to you, I saw what looked like a wolf peering out at us through the branches. Well, peering out at Scrapper, I should say. The poor dog looked like he was going to have a heart attack. I have to admit, my heart was going pretty fast itself, as the head of the wolf was up so high in the air. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Was the wolf in the tree? Was there some raised surface back there that I was unaware of? How could the wolf's head be so high up? And then, the most terrifying thing I had ever seen happened. That wolf emerged from the forest, and I could see it was standing on its hind legs. It was actually over 6 feet tall, and I'm certain of that, because I'm 6 feet, and that thing was way taller than I was. Scrapper and I bolted back inside, and I double-locked the back door. My wife told me to stop making so much noise that it would wake the baby. I was totally freaked out, and I couldn't calm down. Imagine how you would feel if you'd just been maybe 20 feet from something like that. I could barely form words, and I was shaking all over. Sure enough, I woke the baby up, screaming and crying. Now my wife was in a terrible mood. I told her to come look out back at what I had seen, but she wouldn't look, and it had left already, as you might expect. I couldn't even find Scrapper. He was hiding somewhere in the house, but I kept looking. I was worried about him, and with my wife furious at me, he was basically my only friend left at that moment. I was told that since I loved Scrapper so much, he and I could share the couch that night. My wife said she didn't want either of us waking the baby up again. I found it upsetting that she wouldn't even listen to me about what had happened, that she didn't even care, that I was nearly in a state of shock. I wanted to move out ASAP, but my wife thought I was crazy. She ordered me never to speak to her about this supposed wolf-headed man ever again, and I became furious at the disrespect. We started arguing more than we didn't, and soon it became me and Scrapper versus her and the baby. One day, I went out with Scrapper for a very long walk. I didn't feel like there was anything to go home to anymore. The Dogman had ruined my home life. By that point, Scrapper was finding it harder to walk, and I knew his days were numbered. It seemed so unfair that the end of his life should be filled with fear of that wolf-headed man. I wanted to move so badly that I considered getting a place for myself and the dog. I didn't do it, though, because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the baby. I felt like I should be with Jasper as much as I could, because I know what it's like to be abandoned by a parent, and that can hurt for life. So, when Scrapper and I came home and found my wife sitting wide-eyed, shaking all over, the baby crying hysterically, and her doing nothing about it, I had a sneaking suspicion I knew what happened even before she said a single word. "You saw it, didn't you?" I asked. She stared straight ahead, and I wasn't sure if she had heard me or if she had understood. I was about to ask again when she nodded her head in the affirmative. She spoke with a quavering voice, stuttering frequently, but she told me the monster had come. It had walked out of the bushes. It was big and gray, and its eyes looked like something from the underworld. She said it stared at our baby, never flinching. It stared at our baby and walked toward him. I noticed she was dirty and asked if she was okay. She said she fell coming back in the house and almost dropped Jasper but hadn't. She told me we had to move, but that I would need to airlift her out with a helicopter because she was too afraid to walk outside ever again. I had to laugh at that, but I turned away and tried to make it look like I was crying until I could suppress my smiling. I told her I'd bring the car right to the front door and escort her out. She was against it, but I just went and got the car anyhow. When I came back, she had collected the baby's stuff, and she didn't argue as I led her to the car. She kept looking around in a panicked way. It was clear she was expecting the monster to attack from any angle, and that she had been thoroughly traumatized by her experience. We never returned to that house, either of us. We hired movers to bring our stuff to our new apartment back in the city. We wanted no more of the Pennsylvania countryside. It's beautiful, I'll grant you that, but it's weird. And besides, it's the turf of that Dogman that forced me to move. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.